Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. It's terrific to see you all here for tonight's discussion. Let me acknowledge that we gather on unceded Aboriginal land, on Wurundjeri country, and respectfully recognise elders, custodians, and all First Nations people joining us this evening. Understanding the ongoing consequences of colonial violence is at the heart of the work of the Yoorrook Justice Commission. I'm very grateful to Commissioner Kevin Bell and Brent Ryan for taking the time to be with us this evening. I know the Commission is working within a tight time frame and with a very full schedule of hearings, as well as community engagements that are being held across the state. Thanks very much for accepting our invitation to come and speak with the IPCS community. Tonight's discussion is a standalone event, but it follows an international series of presentations and dialogues on decolonising truth that IPCS co-hosted with Deakin University through the pandemic. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Vanessa Borolski in designing and co-convening that series. Recordings of those events are available on the IPCS website. We have timed tonight's meeting with Yoorrook to coincide with the Commission's call for submissions from the Victorian community at large. So while this is an opportunity to learn about the work of Yoorrook, it is also a chance to learn about the kind of submissions that are being sought and to explore wider questions of shared responsibility in the truth-telling process. The emphasis tonight is very much on dialogue. Our guests will each speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will open up to the room. Let me introduce our speakers.
Professor the Honourable Kevin Bell is a non-Aboriginal Commissioner of the Yoorrook Justice Commission. He was a Justice of the Supreme Court of Victoria for 15 years. He played a pivotal role in the implementation and operation of the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act 2006. And between 2008 and 2010, he served as President of the Victorian Civil and Administrative Appeals Tribunal. Prior to his judicial appointment, Professor Bell practiced as a barrister and Queen's Counsel at the Victorian Bar. He's worked on leading native title and human rights cases and was awarded a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to the law and to the judiciary, to native title and human rights in the community. And Commissioner Bell is also a former director at the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law. Brent Ryan is a Mutti-Mutti man, also of Irish descent. Brent has a Master of Education that was completed through the Teach for Australian program. And he spent 5 years teaching at Parkville College inside Australia's Youth Justice Centre. More recently, and through the difficult pandemic years, Brent led the learning and development team at Victoria's largest Aboriginal organisation, the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency, where he became the inaugural senior education advisor, supporting both staff and carers in navigating the education sector and promoting the rights of their young people. Brent is currently working as Assistant Director of Education at Yoorrook, where he works on the shared understanding element of the Commission's mandate. He coordinates much of the community engagement work of the Commission and is preparing the forthcoming work on the theme of education. And as we're about to hear, there's been very careful work done throughout the work of the Commission to identify key themes and portfolios of work. So thank you both so much for joining us. I'm not sure who of you is going to speak first, but please everybody join me in welcoming you.
It's a long time I think I thought when I first came a few weeks ago. It's great to see so many faces tonight, and yeah, thanks for being here. I just acknowledge we're also in our own country, and we're really fortunate enough to have two strong Wurundjeri community members at our workplace at Yoorrook, Commissioner Sue Hunter, who, for me, I met her at the Victorian Aboriginal Child Agency, has been a massive guide for me as a non-Victorian Aboriginal man living down here. And Irene Morris has been fantastic for us as we build our engagement with traditional owners in Victoria. So we're really fortunate enough to have two Rotary owners we're with Yoorrook. As mentioned, I'm Brent, I'm a Mutti-Mutti man, and fortunate enough to live and work on Wurundjeri country as well. Really grateful to work at Pathway College and the strength and resilience of our young kids, but very frustrating. The recidivism rates and kids being removed and living off country, and then I suppose in fact, working with community members every day was a fantastic thing, and a black team, but the rates of removal and out-of-home care are still really high. So for that 9-year period, for me, work was really rewarding, but there was these systemic factors that were really frustrating. So hence the why for me is to join the Yoorrook Justice Commission. We'll both talk about our purpose and our aims in a minute, but there's been some really great work that will come out in our most recent report around those two things, child protection and criminal justice. So thanks for having us today here, and really good to have a chat. I think for me as well, personally, I'm fortunate enough to have an 18-month-old son, Charlie, and I think about what he has at the moment. He's been to January 26 marches, he's immersed in his culture, he knows his genogram, all these great things that I wish I knew growing up, and I know my mother didn't have growing up. And that gives me, and a lot of our other community members, a lot of hope moving forward that this place is going to be safer and better for Aboriginal people moving forward. So Yoorrook's a part of that journey. Can I just get a show of figures? Yoorrook Justice Commission, like out of 5 people's knowledge. So 5 might be Commissioner Kennedy Bell, and 0 might be, I don't know, maybe much about Yoorrook. 2, 3. Can I get a few 2s, 3s, 4s? That's great to know what we're working with here. So how we came about was probably firstly on the back of really strong, resilient Aboriginal people and ancestors, those who are with us and those who have gone, and shared their wisdom with us. But and Commissioner Bell will touch on the voice treaty piece in a minute, and the Uluru Statement from the Heart in more depth. But Yoorrook is a Wemba word for truth. And this is the truth component of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So in 2017, 250 Aboriginal leaders met in Central Australia and asked for a short statement of truth, treaty, and voice. The voice piece is happening obviously at the national level in October for a referendum. We're really fortunate in Victoria to have the treaty negotiations really advanced, and the most advanced any state or territory in Victoria. So the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria leading that at the moment. And we're the truth component. We're the first truth-telling commission in Australia, first of our kind, and we have Royal Commission powers. So it's a really unique blend of Truth-Telling Commission, which I think you've heard from the Truth-Telling Commission at IPCS before, and these Royal Commission powers which we've used and we'll keep using. So to set the scene, the landscape in Victoria is really exciting at the moment. There's a lot happening. Victoria leading the way, but we can't just rest on those laurels, and there's a lot of work to be done. We're Indigenous led, so we have 5 commissioners, 4 of which are Aboriginal, 3 traditional owners. And I'd say probably 40% of our staff are Aboriginal staff as well. So that's something that's different and really exciting. And we are definitely grappling with how you do this kind of business in a black way. It's definitely taking time for us, but I think we're really hitting our straps now. We have this document called a Verse Paper. It's like our Bible of how we do business, and we've summarised that into 3 key objectives. One is establish an official public record of colonisation of the First Peoples of Victoria. That's our first piece. Our second is develop a shared understanding amongst all Victorians of the impact of colonisation, as well as the strength and resilience of our people. And the third is that traditional Royal Commission piece of make recommendations for healing, system reform, and practical recommendations to policies, law, education, as well as lay that ground for treaty, which is obviously happening simultaneously at the moment. We have 3 reports. We've delivered one already. One will be coming out next week, and one December 2024. And we give those to government, but also the First Peoples. So that's really exciting in regards to that implementation piece that we hope a lot of the work that we're doing, talking about, is going to be embedded. So an exciting time. I will just quickly touch on, before I hand to Commissioner Bell, some of what we've heard so far. So some of you may have been tracking our work online or our social media and some of the news channels, but over the last 10 months, we've focused particularly on criminal justice, child protection, and the systemic injustice that our people have faced in those two things, similar to what I mentioned from my experience at Parkville and VACA. We've heard from community members, ACOs, elders. We also heard from government, which was really important as to why the rates of removal are so high, or why cultural plans aren't being adhered to, and what community was saying it's not working for our people. We had apologies from government, and that's a step in the right direction, but without action, apologies probably aren't what they're worth, right? So that report's going to come out in under a week. Yoorrook with Purpose, is it, Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Yes, Yoorrook with Purpose. There's going to be a series of kind of videos and short text to accompany that with our recommendations. So that's a really exciting time for us. But we're cognizant with bringing home report and deaths in custody that our people have been asking for so long to make change, and a lot of those issues and recommendations are still really live at the moment. So we're doing our best to highlight what needs change. And some of the things we heard in child protection was the overrepresentation of our people in our care. Still really, really high, as high as it's ever been. That our children are being removed first without consultation, without ACOs involved, and disrespecting kinship families, so with family, and the lack of cultural plans. Every kid now is meant to have a cultural plan to get them connected. We found about 60% are. In the criminal justice space, we know there's that crossover between the two, is the bail laws, minimum age of criminal responsibility, public drunkenness, and police accountability. And you would have heard some of these things in the news recently with government making suggestions or recommendations or policy changes coming up. So we know that the work we're doing is kind of shocking the world. We've been throwing some pebbles into that water to really begin those conversations, but there's still so much work to do. So I might come back again and talk a little bit about some next steps and those kind of things, but I just want to lay some foundation where we're at. I might hand to Commissioner Bailey and talk a bit about some of the frameworks, where we're going with that injustice. But yeah, really keen to hear you all at the end about some questions that you might be thinking about. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Brent. Lovely to hear it. All good. Brent, thanks for a great introduction. I think the mic's on. It's on. Is that okay? Thank you, Brent, and it's great to be here. I want to recognize Mutti-Mutti. Thank you for your wonderful work on Mutti-Mutti works with us. He's done a fantastic job. Thank you so much. I want to also recognise country. I want to recognise people who are Aboriginal in this room. I want to say how much I'm inspired by the work that has been done over literally centuries to bring us to the point where we now are. It's an honour to be speaking to you and to those who are online. When I sit here on this hill overlooking just down there, my mind takes me back to what happened down on that river. So it's a pretty good vantage point from which to be addressing the things that we're talking about today. I've given some thought to what to say today, and I want to intersect with the Institute as an institute and its powerful work because it's helped to make me who I am. I want to say to the Institute of Postcolonial Studies that for a very long time, well over a decade, you have helped to prepare me for the role which I am doing. I say that most sincerely. I've received good letters. I've read a good amount of your work. I've seen how much you prepare your students, and I've seen how much you engage Indigenous people in what you do. I want to extend my congratulations to you and to say to you, good job, well done. However, I'm not sure about the name. I'm not sure that we can live in a post-colonial world. If colonialism is a structure, not an event, then you certainly need to reflect on the name. We don't like it at Yoorrook. We don't talk that way. We don't talk about post-colonialism. We talk about engaging with colonisation in an unfolding world to try to aim for something different and something better. But that's my only qualification. Now, the purpose of Yoorrook, as specified in the letters paid, naturally assumed the continued exercise of the state. I'm a former judge of the Supreme Court of Victoria. I'm a former Queen's Counsel. I've been engaging with the state, within the state, for a very long time. So this for me is a different way of engaging with the state from within the state. And I don't think any of us should be under any illusions that a Royal Commission is anything other than a state institution. It most certainly is. So I can well imagine Chair Eleanor Burke, a very distinguished Wagaya Wamba Indigenous leader, asking herself the question when she was rung up by the government, would you like to chair this institution? Why on earth would I do that? I can well imagine it, and all the other four distinguished Indigenous members of the Commission, why on earth would I do that? But the reason is that they saw that although the structure of the Royal Commission assumes the existence of the state, the letters taken in their specific terms also assume that they are the leaders of peoples, and by peoples I mean nations or tribe or whatever description one would wish to give to that entity of a polity. A polity being a body of people with an entity over and above themselves, having a political status, having government, having ways of making and enforcing laws, having leadership, representative or traditional as the case may be, but authentic for the polity concerned, and remarkably, the letters taken whilst coming from the Crown, at the same time recognise the very thing which the establishment of the state of Victoria actually rejected. And the establishment of the state of Victoria obviously completely rejected the idea that there was a polity, or more accurately, a body of polities who actually spoke for the country, had systems of government, had representative kinds of leadership, had culture, as it happens, going back beyond any other culture in humanity, and so on. So colonisation rejected all that, and yet here we have letters taken coming from the state, which is the consequence of that rejection, admitting the very fact. So when I think about what must have been in Professor Burke's mind, will I accept this or not, she would have read that and she would have thought, well, that's pretty remarkable. That's pretty amazing, because certainly they were the feelings that I had. I'm just going to pause for a moment to tell you something quite difficult, and some of you will be familiar with this, because we're going into the land justice, injustice reference very soon. I've gone back into the original materials to see how this state was constituted as a kind of state. And I read this morning, it was not an easy read, the letter from Lord Glenelg to Sir Richard Burke saying, get on with the job. Now what had happened, and there are people here who will know this in much more detail than I do, was that just not far from here, Batman signed treaties with Wurundjeri people, and with Dudugala people, with Bunurong people, with Kulin Nation people. And of course that came to the attention of the metropole, and it was realised that the idea of buying something from the natives was absolutely heterodox. And so Glenelg wrote to Burke and said, and I paraphrase, there's no way that these wandering people could possibly have anything to sell. Now, that's a terrible idea by our reckoning, and it doesn't fill me with pride to repeat this in front of this man here. But nonetheless, that was the thinking of the age. He was speaking of peoples whose system of government, whose culture, whose connection with land went back 60,000 plus years. And so I share that with you because I do find it difficult, and I think it states the problem in a kind of fundamental way. Fortunately, it's a problem that our letters patent permit us to challenge. So remarkably, it's relevant for me, not just to do this research here this morning, but to bring this to you and to open it for discussion. And I think that's a very good thing. I think it's something that should be cherished, held dear, and it's an opportunity which I take extremely seriously. So the letters patent are disruptive. They are disruptive of the main idea of colonisation. They are disruptive of the idea that the land could be taken because there was no one governing the land. The letters patent challenge that very proposition, and that they do so because it's now appreciated that sovereignty in this land was never ceded by the Aboriginal peoples. And so we have a situation in which the colonising state actually accepts explicitly that there were peoples here. That is to say that there were peoples here having political status with their own modes for developing socially, politically, culturally, and otherwise, whose sovereignty was never ceded. Certainly the letters patent don't challenge the fact, we call this strangely the legal fact of state sovereignty, but nonetheless, the letters patent raised the problem of the existence of Indigenous sovereignty. So the issue of pluralism, that sovereignty which Indigenous people possess and has never been ceded on the one hand, of that, and the legal fact of that state sovereignty, which is recognised as Australian sovereignty having existed. So the letters sovereignty, it seems to me, the letters patent, it seems to me, certainly provided me with the answer why I should be here. I did ask myself on the way here, would I have accepted this commission if the obvious problem created by the nature of exercise was not itself stated in the commission? Would I have accepted that commission? That's an interesting question. I don't have the answer to it, but I do wonder whether I would have accepted the commission if I could not engage here with you with these absolutely fundamental problems. I'm honestly not sure. Now, moving on a bit. If the state is to be disrupted from within, the disruptors need tools of engagement that are recognised by that state. Of course, it is possible to argue that you can't disrupt a state from within, and that only destruction and reconstruction is possible. And I do not deny that there are historical settings in which that proposition is obviously true. However, strategically, Indigenous peoples all over the world, including in this country, have not adopted that approach. Rather, in the 2 decades running up to 2007, they organised themselves at the United Nations around the formulation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which came to be made after the longest gestation period of any international instrument in that year, 2007. They obtained, by that means, important tools of engagement in the many states in which Indigenous peoples are to be found, in which they found themselves to be encapsulated, almost all as a result of the colonial forces which they confronted and which overran them, although not all in precisely the same manner as occurred here, but almost always with the same consequences. People could not recognise, governments not recognised, land taken, culture destroyed, followed by a long period of 100 or 200 years of resistance, survival, and then fight back from within the state. And Wundrit, they believed, fighting international law from within, using international law against the international lawyers, changing international law from within. International law being an organic practice-made, almost customary phenomena, and using the gifted work of great Indigenous international lawyers, whom I will not name, they managed to achieve almost the impossible, which is the creation of a weapon against international law constituted by its very self. So, thus we have the underpinning of Yoorrook as being UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which recognises the right to self-determination of each people, all peoples, especially Indigenous peoples, and explicitly so, encompassing the right to equal respect for all their human rights, the one that we all here possess, creating their right to everything that we have and all of it, including self-determination within the context of the state who's obliged to enforce, to implement those very laws. Yoorrook's terms of reference are disruptive, not just because that principle of internal energy is picked up and made governing on me. Frankly, not that I needed it, because that is my perspective as a human rights jurist in any event. But I'm glad to have it as a matter of express instruction in the instrument. But the Yoorrook's terms of reference actually require us to think transformationally about the way in which we as a state in Victoria can achieve those objectives. How can we facilitate the means by which the distinct political status of Indigenous people can be achieved? How can the taking of all the land, which is so foundational to their identity and to their connection with their ancestry, be repaired in a way which not just preserves but makes special and legally protected that political status? How can people who have been so damaged yet have resisted so successfully be protected so that they not only survive but thrive? How can they not only be protected in terms of surviving as people who are disadvantaged by comparison with the majority? That's the survival question. Not only that, how can they thrive in their own terms and exercise their own choices with respect to their development, politically, socially, economically? These are big questions, all of them underpinned by powerful human rights principles, which are binding on Australia, therefore on the state of Victoria as the federal unit of that state. All of these things, Yoorrook's terms of reference fall up. Truth-telling is, of course, a really important part of this because there is, after all, a right to truth inherent in the right to bring a complaint with respect to gross human rights violations. That's why we have a coroner's court. The right to truth is a remedy for a wrong in human rights terms. When a wrong is done, it's important to recognise the wrong and then to hold accountable the wrongdoer. So that when the wrongs are on a scale of magnitude of that constituted by colonisation of whole peoples, the right to truth is a large question, clearly. And one needs an institution to give effect to that right, hence the Yoorrook Justice Commission. And certainly I'm a strong fighter for embedding the right to truth in the subjective experience of people. the descendants of those who suffered so badly, who were killed en masse, literally massacred, who were disconnected from their land, whose families were disrupted, whose women were sexually violated as an instrument of colonisation. So I take these things extremely seriously, and not a thing I've said tonight is intended by me to detract from the subjectivity, the enormity, the moral gravity of what was then done. And we will do that. We have done that, and we will do that. Hopefully, in a way that you, Brent, will accept as a proportionate response to what was done. However, the job's only half done by recognising the gravity of what was done, because we must think disruptively. We must think transformationally, and we have tried to do that. We have tried to think about the link between understanding the subjective gravity and the collective gravity of the injustices done to people and peoples in human rights terms, which enliven the strongest case for reparation involving transformation in a way which enables new institutions of state to be created, to be empowered, or for existing relations to be ordered along the lines of realising self-determination, as Indigenous people have themselves demanded now, using that law which was used against them in their favour in the modern era, as specified in UNDRIP, the right to self-determination, the right to equal respect, upholding of the human rights which we all have. Now, all this is a little bit theoretical, so I wanted to now, in closing, bring this down to what we are now doing. As Brent has just said, we're very conscious that there is a national debate, voice, treaty, truth. I don't think there's a person in this room who needs any explanation about what that means. In Victoria, we're somewhat advanced. This is not in the great revolving wheel of history. This is not the place for skiing, because it takes a long time for institutions giving effect to voice, treaty, and truth to become settled in a state. And I'm conscious here now that we're on a journey. I hope this journey ends well. I hope state institutions in this state, now underway in terms of development, become settled, and that we all as a people, as a polity, accept this. So I'm not skiing about it, but we do have a voice here, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, and it's a strong voice. We meet with them often, we meet with the state often, we meet with both sides often, but it's a strong voice. Treaty is at the end of the rainbow, which is not far over the hill. It's starting soon. It's going to be a difficult exercise. Just contemplate, it will not be the same government for the next 20 years. So it's not going to be dependent on a government of a particular colour of these structures. Different governments with different outlooks are going to have to be completely convinced that this is the right thing to do. So we're involved in constituency building, in building a case for internal political transformation of a kind that will deliver on the results which I'm here trying to explain. Now, truth is our business, and Brent has spoken about that. I have too, and we are in we're in the process of receiving that truth and recording it, so that the general community, including you, can see it and assess it. The question is, following from what I've said, how can we receive truth in a way that pays the deepest respect to the dignity of the truth teller having regard to their subjective experience and to that of their families and their ancestors, on the one hand, and yet receive that truth in a way that maximises the chance for disruption, maximises the chance for transformation. And we thought deeply about that, and we have resolved that we want to receive the truth in a way that gives us the best opportunity to explain that truth in terms of the gross human and cultural rights violations that were done by the acts complained of. So that it won't be just a process of receiving in words out of the mouths and the hearts of those affected what was done and how it affects them. It'll be up to us as the people one step removed from that process, not just to record that, but to try to explain it, to try to explain it in terms that bring home to those of us who are advantaged by virtue of being members of the majority, and to bring home to us those who enjoy human rights and expect them to be respected and upheld, just how badly, in legal terms, the wrong that was done to them. How bad was that wrong, not just because of the physical effects, the political effects, the social effects, the cultural effects, the denigration of dignity, but how, in terms that we now understand, it was a grievous wrong in law, a grievous wrong indeed. Because to understand that is to understand that by our standards now, as people in a democracy living under law, their rights, their laws were so traduced, giving rise obviously to a very strong claim for reparations, not just in monetary terms, but in terms of the disruption, in terms of the transformation, in terms of accepting, obviously, a degree of political pluralism, so that which we previously denied, their governance, can be celebrated and inculcated in our present system, their governance. Therefore, Yoorrook has organised the Land Injustice Inquiry, which is really about the whole damn thing, obviously, around certain themes that enable these aspects of colonisation to be brought out. And let me read to you what the themes are. You know, forgive me for repeating.
That's all right. Yeah.
The centrality of country to First Peoples' identity, culture, physical and spiritual well-being, and economic opportunities, and the disconnection and devastation wrought by the forced taking of country to include its language. 2, how First Peoples were dispossessed of their land, including through state-sanctioned policies and laws, massacres and violence, other violence. The past and present benefits obtained by the colonising state, other entities, landholders and settlers through their dispossession of First Peoples and their country. 4, the theft, misappropriation and destruction of cultural knowledge. 5, the way First Peoples maintained their cultural connection to country despite attempts to suppress culture. And 6, the ways to address and provide redress for past and ongoing injustice in relation to First Peoples' dispossession of country now known as the state of Victoria. This includes reparations broadly. Each of these themes is referable to a right specified. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much to both of you. I'm just going to ask one question just to help us open this up a little bit further before going out to the room. And my question is really about the parameters, and in particular the temporal parameters the work the Commission is doing. I think for many of us who looked at a distance at truth-telling as an exercise, we imagined that it was going to be part squarely with the Colonising Act, if you like, with the early period of dispossession, of massacre, of theft, and so on and so forth. But for any of us who've gone on to watch your work as it's unfolded, it's very clear and very powerful that the work that you are doing takes us right to the present. And so when we ask the question, what kind of truths are you eliciting? These are not just survival stories. They are the words of the current Chief Commissioner, the Justice Minister, and so on and so forth. So I think it would be wonderful if you could perhaps just say a little bit more to us about that temporal factor. We had a fair go at the name of our institute. There's a longer and slightly more tangential about as to why we were established with that concept of post-colonial, which I won't go into, but what I will say is that the way we use that concept in the present is not to see it as equally in colonialism as colonisation being a past process, but as having its own very particular, equally violent and ongoing form. So to be a post-colonial anything is not for colonising interests and processes to be done with. So we're constantly having those discussions in this place. What does post-colonial violence look and feel like? How are the implications of acts that occurred 200 or 400 years ago that carry through to the present? Now, the Commission has obviously done its own very, I don't want to use the word cunning, although I love the concept of cunning, interpretation perhaps of the task that you've been given to ensure that your truth value is not directed purely at the past, but that it rests absolutely with the present. So could I invite either or both of you just to reflect a little bit on that perhaps before we open up?
Yeah, I'll start by, I think that's the exciting part, though. Like we definitely want to honour and acknowledge definitely our past on both sides, right? Like we should ask talk about the colonisation part of the rest is we want to celebrate our people and their stories. But I think, as you said, live hearings with government, these kind of things, we're looking at change because our people are still suffering. So to be able to, and previous truth-telling commissions have probably isolated one type of horrendous event in a certain area. We're in Victoria-wide, massive breadth of anything since colonisation, pretty much. So that's overwhelming and daunting, right? But to obviously break it down to our themes and our chapters has been more manageable. But to have live examples and evidence and recommendations come, I think it just makes it, probably for our people, more live. I think everyone can benefit from hearing about our history and the shared understanding piece. But I think for our people, we've spoken out long enough and been consulted that where's the change coming, where I think that's where we get excited now, thinking in the treaty and the current space. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
The letter's been quite explicit about this, so we haven't done any creative work. I think we've had the courage to accept the gravity of the term of reference. I think that's the only credit I give us. The real credit is due to Aboriginal leadership who had reflected the lived experiences and continuing effects of colonisation through advocacy towards the government to establish the structures which we see emerging in Victoria, of which the Yoorrook Justice Commission is a part. Now, to other Victorians, including our current political leadership, I pay the privilege of listening along. There's a lot more listening to do and a lot more willing to do it. But the idea that the colonisation is not an event but structure is the moral foundation of the exercise. It's interesting to reflect on the way that Brent just answered your question. He's answering a question of the person who's living that experience personally, and I respect Brent's answer for a number of reasons, but especially for having the courage to be him and to give that answer. This is not theoretical. So Brent can speak for himself, but I would find it extremely difficult to come here and speak on historical terms about something that happened 200 years ago, when I only had to open my eyes to see that it's still here.
Thank you. Well, we've got a terrific group of people in the room here tonight, and the floor is open to all of you. People who've been working in this area, thinking, living, caring. So please share the microphone around. We need to speak into the microphone so our friends on Zoom. Yes.
On your left.
I don't know if I need the mic in terms of my voice level, but first of all, thank you very much both for being here. Obviously, it's great to listen to you. But I mean, my kind of question, I'll just go straight to it, is about that question of sovereignty.
Yeah.
If the letters patent kind of acknowledge that kind of the, dare I say, moral, legitimate kind of legislative basis for not only Victoria but so-called Australia is like basically bankrupt. It doesn't actually have any kind of like historical ground or any idea of justice. What is the kind of tension that maybe both of you may or may not feel in basically still operating within it? And you talked obviously about the three key ideas of truth, treaty, and voice, but all of them still don't really unsettle the actual foundations of so-called Australia, like at a legitimate level.
Yeah.
And the referendum question obviously is not should the Australian state dissolve and return not only sovereignty, but the many existing sovereignties, the multiplicity of sovereignties, beyond kind of the way that white people understand that. Because I find obviously within this kind of discussion, and obviously I'm white, and the kind of people that I hear and listen are so far away from the barometer of understanding kind of sovereignty. And if they do, it's through this Western sort of legalistic, juridical kind of way of understanding it. And then the other kind of thing is every kind of massacre, every kind of act of colonial violence and stuff like that, there is a person who commits the massacre. There is a person who commits that act of sexual violence. And obviously these things are ongoing, and you have the police commissioner at the commission itself, obviously. And it's easy for them to acknowledge this kind of stuff. But what are the limits of acknowledging this when those structures are still in place? And all it takes, as he says, is through lesser local intelligence of policing and this kind of stuff in this place. And do you not find that, or maybe this is just one part of actually pushing towards the destruction of so-called Australian sovereignty? I'm not sure, but regardless, I'm very thankful for your time and these attentions that I kind of think through, because I mean, I'm from a so-called Dubbo and Raggedy country, and yeah, you just go outside and the kind of destruction of the Gordon estate, the forced removal of 3,000 people in 2005 is an event that happens, and no one obviously knows about it. So I really appreciate your attempts towards truth of this place, because I mean, white beard is obviously pretty fucked up. So yeah, thank you very much, and hopefully that's the question. Somewhat it is. Yeah, but there's many things. The discussion obviously continues. Thank you for your time.
I'm not sure if you'd like to respond or whether we take some more comments in the room.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So yes, thank you. You know, this is a really good question. And I can only, the way that I'd like to respond to the question is more a personal one. So I'm not seeking to give you here a definitive legal solution to this conundrum. Indeed, I don't think it can be resolved legally. The Australian sovereignty is a legal fact in international law terms. It's one that the High Court has, on present authority, held to be non-judiciable here. So one can't challenge the sovereignty of the state in the state's legal institution. Now that closes a certain door, does it not, for the disruptor, to the big continuing serious problems confronting Indigenous people, the losers in the battle for so-called official sovereignty. So that door's closed. Indigenous people have been fighting physically, certainly in the initial period, with all forces at their disposal, including trying to meet all the violence, which such violence as they could muster themselves, with some success in some places. But obviously they were overrun, they were literally outgunned. So that's a fact also. There's another door closed. I don't see a strong voice for violence fighting back in the current environment. I'll leave others to make that case about the strategic wisdom of it. I'm obviously trying to approach your question at the very highest order because it raises really high-order issues. So I'll pay respect to your question. So we can't challenge in the sovereign's court the legitimacy of the sovereign. Violent fight back against historical oppressions is not an option. Then we've got the other problem, which is that the Indigenous people exist now in modernity, and there are benefits, serious good benefits. They're unequally distributed within Australian society, but there are serious, important benefits associated with modernity, which and freedom of choice, respect for freedom of choice, self-actuation, collective actuation. These are things that we have, that they have. So there are choices to be made about how one exists in the society in which one finds oneself, in which one is encapsulated. And I respect the choices that are made by Indigenous peoples, by the First Peoples in that regard. And those choices are to deal with the state as it currently is, and to try to change the laws of engagement by using laws which are enforceable in the state's own terms, using processes in order to internally transform the state, to disrupt it, to make it different to what it was. And Indigenous peoples across the world have done precisely that. They've all adopted more or less the same strategy. Now, some have achieved profound constitutional change, and they've had constitutional recognition of their people. That's a means by which political status is recognised. That's an international human right. The recognition of a distinct political status of the Indigenous people. That should lead to recognition, indeed state funding and forms of self-government and other means of collective actuation. So the answer to the question that I give you really is that I follow the lead of Indigenous people who set down an extremely clear path, which in their terms is their response to the travails of history, which have led them to modernity, which they're trying to change in a way that enables them to be recognised, to have a collective identity, to live, to actuate. And I don't see, I'm not just being pragmatic. I know I'm seeming to be pragmatic, but I'm walking through what the real options are. Maybe that's pragmatism. I don't think that's pragmatism. I think that's a principled examination of how one responds to circumstances, and I think they're right, and I follow their lead.
It'd be nice if people would introduce themselves.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Melinda. Hi, Commissioner Bell and Brent. Sorry, I got that wrong. It is Brent, right? Yeah. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I look forward to this. Theoretically, for you, wondering how to get closer to what's going on. So I'm so thrilled to be here, and thanks for what you're doing. I'm a non-Indigenous woman living, born and raised and working on Wurundjeri country. And the question I wanted to ask you was to go back to around about March when the state government was to come forward with testimony, and I could only look at the recordings and was stunned to see the awkwardness, and there was some sort of dismay, sort of lack of being ready, being prepared, being ready, and having, and that seemed to me so shocking. And so I'm curious if you could talk to us about, tell us more, like what happened there and what did you see, and did you know that was coming down the line, or did it only just unfold in the moment when the recordings were going on? And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with what happened there, and I only think I had an inkling, but I remain pretty curious about that, if it's possible to speak to that at all. Thank
Do you
you.
have a second on that?
I mean, you're on the inside and obviously had a good intel, but I suppose from a Yoorrook staff member, we heard from the community in the lead up. That was lived experience, that goes. So it was the time to really question with our council, with our commissioners, why are things not changing and those kind of things, which is exciting, I think, in part of this work. The accountability piece and the moving forward part. And we have a legal instrument that those to producers and these kind of things that come with that Royal Commission power, and Commissioner Bell will speak a lot better and into more detail than that than me, but a lot of delays on there, and that was probably our first real dealing with the government, coming in and having hearings, these kind of things, and there was a lot of delays. Our report that lands later this week or early next week is actually going to come out in June, so we've been delayed a couple of months in our work, and hence I've received a 12-month extension, which we actually asked for 2 before these delays back in our first report. So kind of adds to that pressure and timeline that we experienced predominantly as a First Nations led Treaty Commission. So, personally, and a lot of the Aboriginal staff, you feel disrespected and you feel like, what are we doing if governments aren't taking it seriously or giving the information we need, because we've got a staff of 40 staff. So we need, and just think about it a lot as a commission level and directors, we need a lot of people to do the work for us and do submissions on our behalf and do the research and these kind of things. And these kind of bigger speed bumps in the road, they're very frustrating. I think.
Can I ask, was there resistance and refusal? Was this a way of scotching it, or they just weren't ready?
Yeah, I think. Do you want to talk to the answer one? Okay. I just want to handle. I think we probably learned that we need to be really clear moving forward on what we need from government. Like we wanted a series of documentation and reports and statements, but I think just the process was delayed on their end, and that's live on our recordings. I know all commissioners individually. I know as a First Nation staff member, really respect the commissioners using that authority and that media piece to formally and visibly kind of real government. That's what people just really think a Royal Commission's about, isn't it, a stand and that kind of piece. But that's a small part of our work. But then again, I think about the end of our commission and our recommendations, obviously do go to First People's Assembly, but also to government. And again, they can make apologies when they come in, but if they're a month late or they're not giving us what we need on time, we can prepare properly. That's going to be happening with land adjusters and premier, all these kind of things that we might be looking at. It can really your hope a little bit. So yeah, they did dig us around, and it's frustrating. And then your question, will it happen again? Next sort of work. So I don't know if that's answers some of your question, but definitely from the First Nations kind of in the office perspective, I was involved in the actual hearing room quite deeply at all, but it's super frustrating.
I've got nothing to add, but.
We've got all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your comments. Perhaps I'll preface what I'm going to try and articulate.
Can you introduce?
By making myself introduce myself. My name is Brent, and clearly, well, I assume it's clear that we all bring particular perspectives to this important subject matter. Perspectives of different kinds. I'm a historian, and so what I'm going to say comes out of my position as an academic historian, as somebody who's in the last 30 years taught the subject on what I call Aboriginal history at Monash University, and I've also written several books, including treaty, most recently work across both Australia and New Zealand on questions of sovereignty. Of course, as a historian, I think history has a particular virtue. In the case of this important subject, I guess, in part, I want to return to Melissa's opening comments about the temporal parameters, and there's clear, I think there was an expectation of many of us when the commission started its work that it was going to focus on what you call the original acts of colonisation, or the early phases, and in some ways the foundational part of the process of colonisation, and that some of us were surprised by the fact that, at least in terms of the public face of the commission's work, it's very much focused on the present. I'm going to say that I'm pleasantly surprised, but it definitely looks like try and explain later why I was pleasantly surprised. I want to take Melinda's comments further, perhaps in a direction that she didn't intend, but I wondered whether the fact that the commission is so much focused on the contemporary reveals that, in some sense, it's grasped that there's something of, I'm going to call it a disjunction between focusing on the contemporary and the process of historical truth-telling. And it seems to me that there is something of a disjunction, what I'm calling a disjunction, at work in Australia today. And I say that largely because it's very evident that there's been an enormous shift in Australia and in other countries like New Zealand and Canada, perhaps to some degree the United States, because the United States doesn't understand itself as a settler society, or understand itself as a colonialism in Australia. And New Zealand and Canada does. Now, in terms of the last 50 years, what I'm struck by, if we compare, say, now with the 1960s, and the nature of the political discourse and the political language, in the struggle for what we might call rights for Aboriginal people, you never heard the word. Moreover, the notion of history wasn't part of that struggle. And that clearly, now the terms recognition and history, alongside of sovereignty, have become absolutely central. And I suppose many of us assume that this is a mark of progress. And I don't want to express some skepticism about that, because, as I think we're all aware, if you look at the major socioeconomic indicators of Indigenous people, whether it's Australia or New Zealand or Canada, there's been remarkably little change as the discourse has changed from a focus on, if you like, equal rights and not much historical talk, to a moment where there's enormous talk about sovereignty and
and history and recognition. Now, I'm of the view that for a long time, at least as far as academic historians like myself go, but I think we were reflecting on broader society, the point of recovering the historical truth of what happened in this country, the point of it was to gain some kind of leverage in order to bring about change in the present. But this was, so when I'm talking about academic historians, of course I'm talking about white historians, and the most eminent historian is Henry Reynolds. And the political project of Henry Reynolds and his generation of historians in the 1970s and 80s and in my generation was to persuade a settler population that these events that happened in the past, that Australians today were the beneficiaries of colonisation, and we had a responsibility to support policies to bring about change. Now, I think what has happened, so I'll say something more. That was part of a project that I might call a project of distributional redistribution of the goods of society, redistributing those goods away from those who had to those who did not. And of course, meaning in this case, Aboriginal people. It now seems to me that as part of the talk about recognition and sovereignty, is that progress has become merely that of recognition, and that it's been separated from the politics of redistribution. And I think this is a real serious problem. I think we're seeing it being played out in the referendum campaign, is that a lot of non-Aboriginal Australians can't see the point, they can't see a connection between the politics of recognition and the politics of redistribution. Once upon a time, even just back in the 1990s, the politics of the politics of recognition, the politics of redistribution were very closely connected to one another. In fact, the politics of recognition was really just a subset of the politics of redistribution. But now I think that connection has been severed. And I'm not convinced that the focus on historical truth today, which I'm going to say as a historian has been going on, if not from the beginning of colonisation, it certainly has been any amount of it in the last 50 years. And I think the premise that just telling the truth is going to be somehow transformative is something that one should be skeptical about. And so what I'm in some sense doing here is recalling an earlier kind of politics, which I want to emphasize as well. The law played little role in that politics. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, there were coalitions between the left and Aboriginal people, trade unions, the Communist Party. The notion of redistribution didn't depend on a notion of rights. I mean, I thought Marx thought rights were about nonsense, that it wouldn't get us far. And I think there's been a very important loss of a particular kind of politics. And I suppose, most of all, I'm just sounding in note of skepticism about whether sovereignty talk, recognition, is actually working at a number of different countries. I hope that's relatively clear.
Firstly, thank you for the contribution that you made to Indigenous history in this country. I think we've been enormously important, enormously that I realise it. I think I've read all your books. If I haven't, that's my own failure to find them all. But you've been an important part of my own intellectual development. And it's wonderful to meet you. I think you're most sincere. You've said a lot of things. I don't find them all consistent. Okay.
I think consistency
Yeah,
is great.
yeah. Maybe it is. All of these ends have their place in an order we would wish to call home. Recognition is not to be underrated, and that's implicit, I think, in your question. For those who are not recognised, who who have to lie about their ancestry in order to get along, who denied, who changed their name, who are racked with internal doubt about their own identity. That's the state of that's the state of non-recognition. That's the state to which this country consigns many Indigenous people. It's not a state that I think we would wish anybody to live in the place we call home. So recognition has its place. A state of poverty, of being transgenerationally entrapped, disempowered, marginalised, living socially, politically, and economically as a fringe dweller, is not a place we would wish anybody to live. In that place we call home with them. And so distribution and redistribution, whether that's by legal means or by political means, I think is a question of strategy. Pure strategy. It only has that appeal. And if redistribution can be achieved by whatever means, then if that results in a more equal place, with people having the same opportunities as everybody else, where people are living together in a state of harmony in the same home, that's a good thing. So recognition, redistribution, these are good things. Truth is a good thing. It is a good thing of itself. It's an end. Now, it's hard to see how people will be able to live, Indigenous people, in a state of recognition and respect of their identity in a home where non-truth is tolerated. I find that extremely difficult. Therefore, I value truth. I see it actually as a legal remedy, but let's leave the law out of it. I want to speak in moral and political terms because that's how you've addressed me. I find it hard to see how somebody who has to deny themselves can exercise the same kind of choice in a society dominated by those who do not have to deny, can succeed on equal terms in competition, in a market for employment and for other goods. So I think mutual recognition is absolutely fundamental to distribution, because distribution is something that flows goods. It should flow equally to everybody. And I believe that recognition of equal identity is absolutely fundamental to distribution. So I don't draw a line between these things in quite the way that your question implies. Or was I wrong in understanding that?
I don't think I'm drawing. I'm really, in a sense, pressing you to spell out how you think the connection between recognition and redistribution is and why it's so vital. Because one could argue, from a historical point of view, that redistribution is possible without recognition of the kind we are.
That's assimilation. Well, that's assimilation.
Well,
so for you to say that you are welcome to the goods of modernity, but I will not accept your aboriginality, is assimilation pure and simple.
Well, I suppose I could respond to that in various ways. I mean, firstly, to say that assimilation can have a range of different meanings rather than the meaning that you, I think, are imputing to that. But I think nonetheless, my point is to reiterate that, is that I think what is happening, at least amongst non-Aboriginal people, is that there is not a very strong sense of the relationship between these two kinds of politics. And I've argued recently that this is one of the reasons why we've spoken with some of
Yes, yes,
that there is
yes.
out there,
That-
but this project
that I
is
understand.
not succeeded
Yes.
in showing what is the connection. And like you, I think recognition is a fundamental human, because I'm not a universalist on many things, but I think recognition is something that's important for all human beings, and as you said, it's very important for young people. In this,
Living
in this
together.
context, Aboriginal people
Yes.
whose sense of self individually and collectively is not being recognised. And so in terms of what might be useful
Well,
psychological
we have common ground. I want to build on it. I want to build on that common ground. Now, can I want to go back to something you said about Yoorrook, which I think is incorrect. The Yoorrook Justice Commission was never established to focus on the act of colonisation as an injustice that happened then, about which truth needed to be told. It was established in order to do that, but in order, as much as that, to examine the contemporary consequences of that colonisation. Now, we are legally obliged to do that, but I defend the correctness of doing that for a whole range of reasons. Now, there is obviously, and as it happens, I fall among the spectrum of views that one may have about this, vested with that power about which choices needs to be made in terms of emphasis. I'm with the truth-telling, and I stand for the prodigious effort that needs to be undertaken to understand this extremely complex phenomenon that we call colonisation. I think we all, in this institute, has accepted the responsibility for doing that, and I praise that. But the people living in a society where the consequences of colonisation are always felt, and there are people in this room who understand that. People here living in this place, and I think in other places where colonisation has impacts which are continually felt, demand as of justice that be a focus of attention as well, and demand as of justice that something be done about that, and demand as of justice that there is an understanding between contemporary injustice and the fact of colonisation. So that it's Yoorrook is certainly about recognition. It's certainly about using means at its disposal in order to redistribute governmental power, patterns of power, goods in a way that's more equal. But it's all of these things actually, mate. It's all of these things.
So what questions lined up? I was actually going to leave my question given the conversation that's just been going on. I mean, I just wanted to, I suppose, thank you for navigating incredibly, and I think in its actual terms, incredibly complex and contradictory mandate. And I think maybe that's what, Bain is picking up.
Yeah.
And the answer, I don't think there are any answers to any of these questions. And I think in terms of a commission like Yoorrook, are a whole set of contradictions that will continue throughout the process. But I still think it's an important and valuable exercise. But I was actually going to ask you a bit about your methodology, because I think it's been really important, unlike sort of more classic truth commission processes where you've had sort of victims basically in some senses becoming a spectacle for passive witnesses to watch them talk about their trauma and suffering, that you haven't done that. And I mean, I think the focus on bringing the Victorian government to the process to actually account for itself was a very important shift away from that. So, I mean, I suppose what I was going to ask you about is the way in which you've engaged with communities, because I've been involved in a project documenting community truth-telling initiatives, and in many ways they kind of represent, when we're talking about sovereignty, they represent sort of on the ground expressions of sovereignty. And it's remarkable how many of these local community initiatives are happening. So I just think they could be that kind of engagement with the community grassroots work that's been going on for decades could be incredibly powerful resource for the video process going forward.
Thanks for that question. So, this is one level. It's been the exciting part of the work. I think the different ways we can speak and in community versus yeah. So there is been different ways and different truth tellings that was more that watch and look, that's a way that can be truth telling and learning from non-Aboriginal people. But for us, we've got a mode of different ways that people can tell their truth, right? So it might be that formal hearing, like you might have seen online. It might be we've got 6 or 7 community truth receivers around the state, based regionally. They've got their own networks and community members, so they can sit individually with an auntie and hold their story. Audio, it might be video, might be drawing, might be painting. So we're actually really tapping in now to what community you want to do. Yeah, sometimes it takes time, sometimes it's different. It's varied. We're going to have it's not a 2-hour block to tell your story and your truth. It's how long it takes, which at times for the truth service can be really difficult because they're talking with community they know, family. They think someone's ready to tell their truth and they're not, which part of our DNA is do no harm as well. So we've got lawyers and Sue around there as well. So we're about to go out and kind of have begun our traditional owner engagement. So the last couple of months we headed out to the state and Matt's been involved in that, and Commissioner Dale and myself, where we've spoken with traditional owners, their boards, their people. We're not we're speaking with those who recognise, those who don't have the government recognise these there as well, and not just that's really important for us to be on the fence and get with everybody here, everyone's truths and stories, right? So, and that's going to be really exciting coming up. We're going to have roundtables, we're going to have closed hearings, we're going to have an uncle might want to film by the river and talk about his story, his country, and his access to water, those kind of things. So, again, this is actually the good part where we can do something a little bit different. We have those Royal Commission powers, we can have the government understand and those kind of things, but we can gather our evidence to have that official public record in a way that the community want to be heard. And I think the challenge for us is if the community want their story shared, that's where there's those options of amplifying truth stories and the truth telling can come in. So, yeah.
We'll take one more comment question, and then
mine's very quick. As you know, the King of England has reserved powers in the Constitution. It is part of the government executive. Had we become a republic in 1999, do you think that would make a difference to the work we're doing now and what's going on with respect to recognition of indigenous people?
Well, yes. I think that would imply a degree of civic consciousness. That would have been consequences for other aspects of our understanding of our own Republican composition, which would have made it easier. That's my view. I know that it's the view of many Indigenous leaders. But my view is that if we were a republic, that implies a much stronger need to understand oneself as a body politic had its component parts. So it makes, I would think, Indigenous issues. Well, maybe we could still have now, but probably. But there is a case against that, which is that yeah, it's not a necessary consequence, but I think it probably would. Yeah.
So what we haven't spoken about, of course, is the fact that we have opened up for submissions on the wider community. And I suppose in closing, it'd be terrific just to hear a little bit from you on that. And also to invite you, if you'd like to provoke us, this particular community, in relation to your process, to give us a sense of what you would like to see from us. Has the group of commissioners and staff had your own discussions about the way you would like to see the wider community engage and take up the process that you're certainly involved in?
So I think a couple of months ago we opened up our submission process to all Victorians. So we thought it was really important to start with our elders and then our community, and that's still going. And our submissions to form that evidence and a report will still go for the next, at least for 12 months. But it's an opportunity now for all to really actively engage, not just follow the socials and do those kinds of things. But I can tell people that are here today and you're doing your self-learning, you're kind of what's next, how can I really get involved? And what that submission piece looks like from our website point of view, it's just to jump on and you can make a submission. It has to be a story or evidence or documents against injustice to our people. So we've spoken to a lot of kind of groups and people are really excited about documents they've heard about or sitting back and reflecting on organisations they work at and what part they've played in, whether it be university institutions or farming and those kind of things. And we're getting out of countries, as I mentioned now, so we're hearing one of those stories. But you always heard something and wondered, oh yeah, that doesn't sound right, or that person told me that, or you've experienced something in an organisation, those kind of things. And we're going to kind of put out more formal communication in the coming weeks around what, especially land injustice looks like. I think that's the real big opportunity for non-First peoples to make a submission. I'd really recommend you do that. I think the truth-telling piece before you mentioned, made some of the work you're doing, and that's really important. And we need people like you to do that work. Like we make up, in Victoria, 2.5% of the population or something. So we've told our stories many, many times, like I mentioned before. We need truths and documents and things that have worked against or strengthen the resilient stories of our people that you've heard to help build that record that will inform those recommendations. So you actually see change. We should know you want to add something.
I don't think I do. I think we've heard from Brent, who's asking for participation, and I would simply say, please consider seriously the invitation which has just been extended to me. Please seriously consider.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to come along. It's been a conversation that's opened up some threads that I think a number of us have not necessarily thought through before. I think there's a lot more to think about and talk about. I have the beginnings of a sense of the way the Yoorrook process connects up to the treaty process, and that there are all sorts of interesting things perhaps hovering beneath the radar at the moment. I think I very much agree with Brent that Victoria is a very interesting place to be at the moment, and I guess we just wish you all well with your incredibly difficult, challenging task, and look forward to seeing what comes next. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
have a reading chat with us. So if you have time to do input, I'd like to get over
Maybe.
that.